instructions.
We are being hypnotized by people like this. Newsreaders, politicians, teachers, lecturers. We are in a country and in a world that is being run by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what we're told is going on and what is really going on is absolutely enormous.
Oh yeah, dude. There's some Nephilim.
It's like we all know what's going down, but no one's saying shit what happened to the home of the brave. These motherfuckers, they controlling us now, and no one's talking about how they made us modern-day slaves. And everybody's just walking around, head in the clouds, and won't awaken to a dead in the grave. But then it's too late, we need to be ready to raise up. Welcome to the end of days.
Everybody is slaves, only some are aware that the government releasing poison in their...
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Nephilim Death Squad. I am David Lee Corbo, a.k.a. The Raven. That is TopLobsta, the father of disinformation. Hello. I am in a new place, and I know that that's jarring for some people. I know people don't like change. Let me give a quick shout out.
I'll tell you the truth, David. I prefer it this way. This feels good. Yeah.
You know why I don't like it? Because I'm looking at how cool our set looks behind you, and I go, I miss it. I'm on the road.
I like your free Masonic checkerboard in the back. That's real nice.
I actually asked them, I said, do you have anything Freemasonic? And they said, I guess so. We can set you up with these. I said, would have preferred black and white, but beggars can't be choosers. I'm actually in Chop Studios in Matawan, New Jersey. I just love to give them a quick shout out. They have a whole studio
a shout out and pay them. Very cool.
Well, I mean, yeah, that seems fair, doesn't it?
See the Patreon. That doesn't seem fair at all.
Also, guys, we're gonna paywall this, huh? 30 minutes or somewhere around 30 minutes. We're gonna be going live exclusively to patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad. And if you're wondering where the stream went, that's where it went. If you want to continue watching, go over there, pay us. That would be fantastic. Otherwise, you can be poor with the rest of the poors, and you can not watch this until it releases maybe about a week from now. Your choice. Losers. There's also a discount code off of merchandise from TopLobsta.com on patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad. You can pick up super dope merch that I got my hands on. I'm very excited. I got my binaural beatdown shirt. Let's do that. Binaural beatdowns, because it's very funny. Look, you don't even have it on there anymore. Is it? I'm sorry.
I don't even know where it is. There it is.
Where the hell is it? Binaural beatdowns is a banger of a shirt. I got it in white and it really pops. And I think it's a great conversation starter. People see that, they go, what does that mean? What does binaural beatdown means? And that means when you sleep with a fan and it lulls you into astral projection and you get your ass whooped by demonic entities. Yeah, it's a really cool shirt. Go pick that one up from TopLobsta.com. All right, joining us today is Mario of Symbolic Studies. Mario, you are crushing it on all platforms, and so I think it's important that before we start this conversation, let's let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. So people can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, things like that. But the easiest way is just to go to symbolicstudies.com, and you can find all my links from there.
Very cool. I have to start by asking, because your body of information is quite substantial. And one of my favorite accounts on X, in a place where everybody's screaming into the ether about the coming, it is very refreshing to go and find somebody's content who's just going, hey man, look at all this really fascinating stuff. Look what it means. Look at the definition of things. And let's try to understand these symbols, because the vast majority of us, we just point at them and we scream Illuminati. And that's not what you do, Mario. You actually unpack some of these ideas. I want to start by asking you how, why, what drove you to the madness of trying to understand the symbolic language that surrounds us here in this earthly realm?
Yeah, great question. I've always been very visual. So I consider myself a lifelong artist, and I've done all sorts of different types of art, but a lot of it is very much visual. So illustrations and paintings and things like that. Eventually I found graphic design. And so in high school, I discovered Photoshop and I started designing stuff for my friends' bands. So I was really plugged into like the hardcore and metal scene and things like that years ago. And so I was doing stuff for the local scene. And then after a while, once I started getting clients and everything else, and I really started taking design seriously, I really wanted to know some of what I was working with, these different icons and colors and whatnot. And starting around 2008 is when I began collecting symbolic dictionaries and symbolic reference books and things like that. And to me, I was kind of blown away. I had no idea that you could even make a study of symbolism. You know, what does the lion mean? What does the color yellow mean? What does the number 5 mean, or the square, or whatever? And so it basically became a passion of mine over time. And I started buying all these books. Now I have like a pretty good library of symbolic reference material. And inadvertently, I found out that that really helped with my art, and it really helped with my design skills and everything else. So it actually made me a more competent designer. Over time, I became really interested in film. So I went to film school for a number of years. I also became interested in the tarot, and the tarot really opened me up to a whole nother world of symbology. You know, from there, I got interested in astrology. I got interested in various myths, numerology, things like that. And at some point, I realized that this study of symbolism is basically the study of metaphysics, actually, when you break it down. And that symbols are essentially, for a long time, they've been the best way to encode metaphysical truths. And so once I found that out, I kind of was all in with symbolism. And then once I found the authors that were really worth following and reading and everything else, it was off to the races. And so, you know, it answered a lot of questions to me that I wasn't getting elsewhere. And now, because I have like a strong, and it's you know, there's still room for growth. Obviously, I call my channel Symbolic Studies because I consider myself a perpetual student, right? But as I started studying basic symbolism, I realized that it helped me understand mythology, world religions, kind of even a lot of things that are happening in the news and on the world stage and things like that. It just seemed to me it was like a perfect fit with my background with art and everything else, and being interested in occultism and conspiracies and truther stuff. It was just a really perfect blend for me to dive into it.
I love it. Man, okay, I'm gonna have to talk with David because it looks like I might just go ahead and subscribe to your Patreon. Seems like you got a lot of stuff that I need to know about, but you mentioned something right off the bat. You were talking about the meaning of color, and backstage we were chopping it up as we were waiting for David, very rudely taking his time to get to the stage. It's fine, it's okay. No, but you mentioned the color yellow and whatever, just the utilization of different colors in your graphic design, how that's helped you. And it's part of a journey that I've been on. As I told you before, like looking at frequency, particularly this thing called perfect pitch. I don't know if you're aware of that. So before I was a graphic designer, I was a musician, and one of the things I was obsessed with, man, maybe 10, 15 years ago, was the idea of perfect pitch or relative pitch, meaning you could identify a sound right away, but then that kind of bleeds into something called synesthesia, which like Jimi Hendrix has been known to have. And that's not just his LSD usage, which is actually, it's interesting when you consider that the rabbit holes that we've gone down with this show, the drug usage, and then synesthesia, hearing color. But he has a song called Bold as Love where he's talking about like the color yellow. What does that mean? The color orange. And he's kind of like going through each verse, and I forget the lyrics to it, but he's basically talking about the characterization of these colors and how it pertains to his life story. So what do you, can you break down just some of the, I'm going to ask him, break down colors for me, but like, can you do that?
Yeah. I mean, everything is symbolic, right? So everything is symbolic. I'll say on a more broad level before we get into any specific colors, symbols are a bridge to the divine. That's how I personally see it. A lot of the authors that I follow and really respect and admire, they are essentially saying the same thing. And so everything symbolic in this realm is actually an emanation of something higher, right? And so the reason why symbolism to me matters is because it encodes information from a higher, sort of more divine plane, right? I'm of the opinion, just briefly, to talk about sort of how I perceive metaphysics and everything. Everything emanates from a center and returns back to that same center. So everything is sort of a reflection of that original center, right? And so this original sort of seed, or this principal unity, you know, some people might call it source. And so everything we see around us, you know, whether it be an animal, a raven or a lobster, as an example, right? Whether it be a number, it could be anything, any sort of plant or tree, a rock, you know, any sort of color. It's a representation of something of a higher order. And so in a way, they are all bridges to this divine sort of concept or whatever. And this used to be really important to ancient peoples. They thought that basically everything in their life had meaning. Everything in their life sort of had purpose, right? That everything was sort of ritualistic in a way and sacred in a way. And so it made sense for ancient peoples to sort of encode their world or reality with things that actually had sort of intention behind it. We've really lost this as modern people. We've lost this to a huge, huge, huge degree. So now there's a lot of people who think that their life is meaningless, right? And so they kind of don't have orientation. There's really no purpose, right? They've kind of lost this divine spiritual kind of spark, in a way. And so the study of symbolism really is a study, again, of this higher order. And colors are like a basic foundational part of all of this, right? Because everything visual is color based. But I'll say one of the interesting things when we're talking about visuals and we're talking about things that are sort of aesthetic visually, that actually basically there's two different main societies, two different cultures. And we live in an agrarian farming society, basically. So we're a settled people. So people like to kind of establish their land, stick around somewhere, and basically have a property, have a place to call their own, have a place to call home. This is in contrast to nomadic peoples. So nomadic peoples were always traveling, and so they had their seasonal migrations and everything else. All of humanity began as nomadic people. And so we were more travelers. And so there's a major distinction between nomadic peoples and settlers. Nomadic peoples, the artwork that they preferred was actually art that unfolded over time. And so they actually preferred music, as an example. They preferred the oral tradition, right? They preferred poetry. They couldn't bring, their artwork with them, basically, but they could play music. They could bring a flute, or they can bring simple instruments. They can sing. They can do all these different things. So they had a different relationship with symbolism. They preferred sounds, things that are auditory. Versus settled people, they prefer artwork that's visual. They prefer artwork that unfolds over space. And so they prefer actually like architecture, right? Maybe creating statues or totems, painting, drawing, things like that. So that's one big distinction that's actually very, very interesting between these two societies. So because we live in a agrarian farming society, we have a stronger preference for all things visual. In actuality, though, if we're breaking down just symbolism with sound and audio, that and music is closer to spirit than things that are visual, right? That's actually just kind of like, I think everyone sort of almost understands that, right? When you hear something, you can be moved and you could have all of these different emotions and everything else. You can certainly have that same experience visually, but I think there's something about music and sound and poetry that kind of like cuts to the core a little bit more. So there's 7 colors of the rainbow, right? And so what is a rainbow? A rainbow, it looks like an arch, right? Or an arc. It's been viewed as a bridge. So this bridge has been used in various myths as a bridge to the other side, right? To the underworld or what have you. And so there's the rainbow bridge concept. So you have 7 colors of the rainbow. Now, it's fascinating to me. The number 7 is so significant. Some people have said that it's really sort of the esoteric patterning of this realm. The number 7 has something to do with that. We have these 7 colors of the rainbow. We have 7 days of the week, right? We have 7 chakras. It goes on and on and on and on. The number 7 is really, really important and significant. There's even
7 modes in music as well. This is what I was talking to you pre-show. Before you come to the completion and then repeat the cycle with that's called an octave, you'll have 7 steps in a key, in a major key. So it's like, it's all the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so the number 7 has been viewed as sort of this divine, almost complete number. There's a sort of perfection aspect to the number 7. And so to me, there's no surprise that there are these 7 colors of the rainbow, right? Obviously, when you're dealing with the rainbow, that spectrum, you're dealing with colors that are of a higher nature, vibrate on a higher level, and then colors that are of a lower nature, right? So at the bottom, you have red, and below that, you have infrared, right? And then at the top, you have violet, and then above that, you have ultraviolet, right? And so to me, one basic sort of way of looking at the colors is to see how they're actually related to our chakra system, and how our root chakra would be red. It gets a bit warmer, it gets cooler as it goes up, and our center chakra would be green, right? And so that would make a lot of sense. Our heart chakra being green. Green is the color of Earth, Mother Nature. It's the color that we see the widest sort of spectrum of. That's my understanding, is that our eyes can pick up more types of green than any other color, in the rainbow. But the lower colors, like when I think of red and I think of yellow and I think of orange, there's a reason why you see most of those colors. You guys have probably heard this before, but you see a lot of those colors with fast food restaurants, right?
I mentioned that yesterday.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's all over the place. So the Golden Arches, Carl's Jr., Chick-fil-A, etc. They're using all of these lower colors, and what's been said is that it actually it kind of promotes people to buy food, because it sort of relates to hunger and necessity and things like that. And the lower chakras are kind of related to that as well, I would say. But each color, really, there's a whole book and there's a whole sort of like volume of information about each color. Just depends on sort of the aspect that you want to talk about, with these colors. But even with the colors, just like what you're saying, there's a musical sort of aspect there and everything else. So I'm really interested in correspondences. So if somebody said, hey, let's talk about the color blue, it's like, then you're talking about water. Then you're talking about the sky, right? Then you're talking about all these things that are blue, in nature. So each color is its own rabbit hole, basically.
Let me ask you. Go ahead, Top.
I was just going to say that I found I don't know if I'd say in my studies, but in my experience, I have like slight synesthesia, but like the color orange relates to the key of E major for me. So that's two sharps, meaning like two of the notes are sharpened. The color blue, like behind me, a lighter blue specifically would correlate to the key of F major or D minor. They're the same thing. And then green would be the color, the color green would be the key of G, which is like one shot. I don't know what this has to do with anything, but I know that we perceive music on like a frequency and vibration basis. And I know that we also perceive like light color specifically as frequency and vibration. So it's like the overlap is, I don't know where to put it, but other people have also expressed the same sort of sentiment toward even the same key signatures, like as far as they relate to color, which is bizarre to me. Like you said, like they correlate to certain things, and it's like, why?
Right, exactly. Well, I'll just say that this is a sacred science. And so that's one of the things that took me a while to sort of realize, is that when I first got into symbolism, I think I had a lot of ideas that didn't really, there was no foundation or whatever. And then over time, I sort of realized, oh no, there's actually a scientific quality to all of this stuff, that you can actually make sense of it. And you can actually sort of understand how it's patterned, and, sort of, I wouldn't say that there's necessarily rules, but there's a whole established history of symbologists and things like that have made sense out of all of these different symbols. And I think a lot of people, when they get into symbology, a lot of them never make it to that level. A lot of them, everything is sort of just kind of, out there, and it's almost kind of, it's just like in this murky water or something like that. But I'll say that personally, the way I tend to look at everything, the center itself gives you orientation for all things, basically, and so the center of self gives you orientation in this world, in my opinion. If you have a spiritual leader, that person is sort of like a symbolic center in your life. You're looking towards them for direction, for guidance, things like that. There's a lot of symbolism that relate to like Christ and other spiritual leaders, where they basically are embodying sort of this center for people. And so the center, in my opinion, sort of makes sense out of all of it, including colors and numbers and everything else. What this is really referring to, if you want to talk about it like on metaphysical terms, is like non-duality. Is that non-duality existed, a supreme principle existed, the monad existed, and then everything is sort of an emanation or an expression of that. So everything is also a reflection of that as well. And so as an example, just to use the color thing, so in astrology, the rainbow actually has a huge correspondence with Sagittarius. So Sagittarius is the centaur archer. Centaur, even centaur sounds like center, right? And so if you have a bow and arrow and you have the arrow pulled and you're aiming for a target, what are you aiming for? You're aiming for the center of the target, right? The dot in the middle of the bullseye. And so the rainbow relates to the bow as well, because we're dealing with the bow. The shape of the bow itself relates to the rainbow, right? And then you're also dealing with the symbolic arch of the arrow as well. It makes a bow, right, when you're shooting it into the sky, right?
You know,
but
it's
one of-
interesting. It's a crazy thought. God ends the world with a flood, sends a rainbow to say that I won't do it this way again. But the archery term for missing your mark would be sin. And the reason, I mean, you know, some people, we'd argue that it's the Nephilim why God sent the flood, and some people argue it was just man's sin. But it's kind of interesting that little overlap, the archery term of sin, the archer, the centaur, the rainbow, it's kind of all circling itself.
Yeah, exactly. No, the rainbow for a long time, it's been used to represent symbolic endings and beginnings. And so that's what it represented when it was seen. It was the thing that sort of initiated the end of the flood, right? Or kind of signaled the end of the flood, rather.
Yeah.
You know, so it kind of brought about this new beginning. And so the end of the cycle, beginning of another one. So the interesting thing about Sagittarius is that there is a myth of a centaur in Greek mythology that Sagittarius is related to very strongly. And the myth is of this centaur named Chiron. Chiron was born and his parents considered him to be a freak because he was half human, half horse. So he was abandoned by his parents. This abandonment is considered to be one of his greatest wounds. And so it's like this invisible wound sort of thing. And he ended up being adopted by the gods of Olympus. And he became a world-renowned healer, essentially, an herbalist and all these other things. But he had multiple setbacks in his life, including being abandoned by his folks and including being a centaur. So in Greek mythology, centaurs were viewed as being very lusty and brutish and all these other things, right? And so he was able to overcome all of these obstacles and basically become what people refer to as the wounded healer. And this is sort of the archetype for all shamans and healers and medicine people and things like that, is that oftentimes the greatest healers actually had to transmute major wounds that they suffered when they were children, right? And so he's known as the wounded healer. And it's interesting because the tarot card that corresponds, there you go. Yeah, exactly. The tarot card that corresponds with Sagittarius and Chiron is the Temperance card. And there's even some cards where they will show a rainbow, you know, over the main figure in this card. It usually shows like a woman. She has wings, so she's an angel, and she's pouring from one chalice to another, right? There's a lot of deep symbolism about that card, but a lot of it has to do with alchemy. And the alchemical sort of system that I put a lot of stock into is called Azoth alchemy. And Azoth alchemy has 7 steps, basically. And there's even an acronym that outlines these 7 steps. It's called vitriol. And vitriol is basically an acronym that each letter of vitriol basically is the first letter of a word, which creates this sentence of 7 words. And when you break down this sentence or you expand this sentence, it says, visit the interior parts of the earth and you'll find the hidden stone, or you'll find the hidden medicine, basically. Now, it's not talking about literal earth. It's not saying go to the center of earth. This is a metaphor. It's saying go to the center of self and you'll find your medicine. You'll find the philosopher's stone. I think when people are referring to the philosopher's stone, the Holy Grail, all sorts of other relics, they're actually talking metaphorically. They're not saying actually make the philosopher's stone. They're saying the philosopher's stone is within. The hidden medicine is within. And there's this idea of there being 7 steps to go to the center of self, basically. That is what that Azoth alchemical formula represents with its 7 steps. Those 7 steps also have a correspondence with the 7 traditional planets. And so there's this old idea that to get to the center of self, you're going to have to remove a series of veils, or you're going to have to cross 7 thresholds, or to go to the other side, or to astral travel, that you need to cross 7 thresholds or 7 membranes, or go up a ladder that has 7 steps on it. You'll see in some Freemasonic tracing boards that sometimes they will show a ladder with 7 steps on it, basically, which is pretty much emblematic of this exact same process.
That's
Or you'll
fascinating.
see,
We've been talking about the existence of like 7 heavens,
yes, exactly.
God existing in the 7th heaven. So 7 layers, say it, 7 heavens, 7 rungs on a ladder. Yeah,
That's it.
interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Even there's a lot of old labyrinths where labyrinth used to be more like circular in nature. When we think of a labyrinth today, we oftentimes confuse it with like a maze. A maze is usually kind of rectangular or square-like. Old labyrinths were circular, and they kind of wrapped around themselves to a center, basically. The idea was to get to the center of the labyrinth.
Yeah.
And when you count from the outside of the labyrinth towards the center of the labyrinth, oftentimes there's 7 steps. There's 7 main tiers.
We were just talking about the labyrinth recently on a couple of episodes, and people confuse it with the maze. Or the maze is sort of designed to keep you lost and unable to find the center. The labyrinth, if you continue on the path, you will end up in the center. You just have to, it's this elongated version of what instead would be a straight line. But we're talking about this.
It's almost like the labyrinth draws you into the center. I mean, with the guest that we were talking with, Kingdom in Context, he was talking about the fortress cities like Jericho, which were designed as a labyrinth in a sort of circle, that it's designed to draw the enemy army in. But as you go in deeper, it's going to lead you to the center, but it's a complete trap because there's one way in, one way out. Whereas a maze is like, doesn't seem like it really wants you to get to the point.
Center, and then they would have archers stationed all throughout the labyrinth city, and then you'd have a real time trying to get out. I wonder, because you started with band t-shirts and things like that, which is interesting because heavy metal bands, they utilize a lot of this symbolism. And I wonder if you've gotten to the point now where you recognize when somebody's faking the funk. In other words, symbolism has it has this ability to tell an unbelievable story and with these really deep details, but also archetypes and concepts that are really like true to the human experience or true about the nature that we inhabit, or the nature of the realm that we inhabit. But then there are people who will just go and gotta get an all-seeing eye tattooed on my arm. Now I'm Illuminati'd up. You know what I mean? There you go. We have a bunch of goofy stuff. I thought you were pointing to one of the many goofy things we have.
I'm turning on my hair light. We got a hair light in here. This is a good studio.
So are you to the point now where, you can see inherently when somebody's like, you're placing these symbols within an image, adjacent to each other, but they're not really telling a story, versus when somebody has done something and you quickly pick up on, wow, this is saying something profound, something, that is, that resonates with our experience.
Right. Yeah. I'll say that absolutely. I've seen it where people are faking the funk for sure. You could put Baphomet on a album cover or t-shirt, but do you know really what it sort of represents and means and everything else? On the other hand, so I've seen that for sure. On the other hand, though, I've seen a lot of bands where I've been shocked at the depth of what they're putting into their albums, because that's my main genre still. I'm a metalhead basically, and so all genres of metal and everything else. And I've been blown away at some album covers and t-shirts and everything where I'm like, whoa, is this guy like, he must be a serious occultist, or his artist is, that's another thing too, being a designer. I've designed things for clients where they don't know the depth or the sort of intention that I had behind it even, but they just like it aesthetically.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that I've noticed a lot.
Hey, let me ask you really quick. I'm going to pull this up. I know you said you're a metalhead, but whatever, because we're going to look at this. What do you think about this album cover?
Michael Jackson was like really wild with it. And it's to the point where somebody like me, most of it is lost on me.
Oh yeah, I have no idea. Right. I mean, but I know that it's significant. I mean, we can pick out a couple of things in here, but I'm sure you'll have a field day looking at this.
Oh my goodness!
What is Michael saying, Mario?
Yeah, right. I mean, this is really, really dense, man. I mean, there's so much going on here. One of the things I'll just say right off the top of my head, what I'm kind of seeing that I think is interesting is that red star right there, right underneath his eyes, underneath that peacock. Notice that it's framed and there's kind of like two cherubim angels kind of there, right?
Mm.
And star symbolism to me is so fascinating. I've gotten really, really into the nature of the star and what it represents. And in my opinion, personally, based on my research with the authors I like to follow, there is a sort of star of stars, and it's the North Star. It's the pole star. It's the central star in the heavens. It's the star that all of the other stars, including the stars of the zodiac, the constellations of the zodiac, they all revolve around the North Star. They all go counterclockwise. That's very significant. I've done so much research on this. The reason why it's so important and significant of a star is that ancient peoples basically had a very high reverence for the star, more than the sun. So this is something that's kind of interesting. If you buy a lot of newer symbolic dictionaries, there's an overemphasis on the sun and solar symbolism, and they'll attribute everything to the sun, basically. When you find older works, that is less so the case. And then when you find really, really like the cream of the crop symbologists that exist, that have existed over the last like 150 years, they will all acknowledge that there was this massive shift from polar symbolism to solar symbolism. And this shift took place over hundreds or thousands of years because we live in a very solarized sort of world where everything is more so about the sun. I post a lot about astrology, but it's a solar based system because we're dealing with the ecliptic, which is the path of the sun. While that wasn't always the case, that there were people that didn't give much credit to the sun, and people were basically focused on the northern sky. And they were focused actually on the two constellations that go around the pole star the closest, which is Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, or the Great Bear and the Little Bear.
That's interesting.
This was the primary sky clock.
The swastika is a representation of the one of the dippers as it proceeds to the equinox. No,
that's it. It's Ursa Major going around the pole star. You're basically looking at each arm of the swastika is looking at Ursa Major once a quarter, once a season. Yeah.
Right. You know what's fascinating too about that image of Michael Jackson's album cover, if that was his album cover, he has his own like Masonic pillars, and the archway, the Masonic arch is actually the words dangerous, which is interesting, right? It looks like he's got his own like pillar and archway going on.
Ooh, bro.
That's pretty fascinating.
You just pointed out something really interesting, and I wonder if this is intentional or not. So notice that the letter right underneath that star is E.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's the 5th letter in the alphabet, but I don't really know. I was like trying to find some significance. I know we kind of set out to talk about Cancer and it being the cornerstone, and I was hoping for something, but then I was like, wait, I don't know which number.
I feel like this might be. I don't know if you're into it, but I feel like you'll have to come back at some point.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, for sure.
So what do you think is going on there with the E?
Okay, well, it weaves in perfectly with the Freemasonic stuff. And so notice, as you pointed out, that there's basically two pillars. So there's two pillars on the left and the right, and then you have dangerous across. And so the apex of the arch, that E, symbolically would be the keystone. So the keystone is that stone in the middle of the royal arch, right? And that keystone actually corresponds with the northern sky. And there's a lot of symbolic evidence that this is actually the case, right? Because whenever you have two pillars, symbolically, there's always a third pillar. There's always an implied third pillar, basically. And so when you see the twin pillars, right, or you see the twin towers, there's an implied third tower. It's just always the case. This is how it works. And so even in the Kabbalistic tree of life, most people pay attention to the two side pillars. We call them Boaz and Jachin, right, in Freemasonry. But there's that central pillar. That central pillar actually extends above and below the other two side pillars. And so in some of these Freemasonic tracing boards, you will have these two pillars, and then you will have a central pillar. Oftentimes, this central pillar is literally breaking through the heavens, or there's a ladder that ascends just behind or just in front of it, and it's actually going to the heavens as well. So this central pillar, basically, is symbolic of what's referred to in symbolism as the world axis. And the world axis is this idea that there is an axis or a symbolic pole that extends from the North Pole to the pole star. Notice that they both have pole in the name, right? And so this is the point of pivot for all things. This is what ancient peoples thought, that this was a spiritual pole or a spiritual axis that everything revolves around, because the North Star is the center of the wheel of heaven, basically. It's also been called a millstone. It's been called a bunch of other things, but it's the point of pivot. It's the axle in the middle of this wheel, right? And so in Freemasonry, you have the two side pillars. One is generally associated with the masculine, one is associated with the feminine. The masculine is associated with the sun, the feminine is associated with the moon. So what's to be said about the third central pillar or post, right? One is solar, one is lunar. The whole key behind this is that the central pillar is actually polar in nature. And so this is an old sort of concept that a lot of ancient cultures, like I'm saying, they had a very strong reverence for. And so their main sky clock literally was Ursa Major and Minor going around the pole star. Today, people's main sky clock would be the path of the sun and the planets, basically, and the constellations that the sun revolves in front of, basically, right? So back to the E. So on these Freemasonic tracing boards, oftentimes E is going to be the very top sort of part of the canvas. There will be an E, because actually every single part of the canvas, all of the four sides, represents a different direction. So it'll be E above, west down below, and then north and south on the sides. E symbolically, basically, it represents east, but when we're talking about it esoterically, when a lot of old occultists and magicians and mystics and things like that, when they refer to the quest for the Orient and this sort of eastward kind of journey, they're not talking about literal east. They're actually talking about the north, that actually beyond the north, almost Hyperborean, in concept, that literally east has been used in some esoteric circles to represent the north, basically, and the North Star. So it would make sense that the central pillar that has this relationship with the North Pole and Pole Star, the North Star, actually is indicated as east. And so there's a lot of examples of this, but east is sort of a code for north, funny enough.
Mario, what do you make of it when these symbols appear in dreams? Especially when they are seemingly pointing at what we now understand as their meaning.
Right. I think using symbolism to your study of symbolism to analyze your dreams is super potent. It's super powerful. There's a lot you can take away from that. And I actually do dream analysis for some people. People have reached out and asked, can I decode their dreams? And I've done sessions with people to do that, amongst other things. So I think there's a lot you can take away. What I will say, though, is that you can get lost in the decoding, and you can kind of get lost in analyzing your own sort of experience symbolically. And so that's one thing that I do kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily warn people of, but I just let them know that, because sometimes some people, I don't know if you guys know anyone like this. I know several people like this, where they're so open. It's almost like a camera whose aperture is wide open to allow in a lot of light. You're so open that you're picking up this license plate and that bird and this tree and this thing and that billboard, this ad, whatever. And I think that you could almost get lost in the sauce with all of that stuff. So I think you need to almost have healthy discernment when you're decoding your own dreams or when you're actually decoding your own experience. Yeah.
I had a weird one when I was young that's always stuck with me. And it's like, there it is. I knew he was waiting for it. It's very like, there's not a lot of symbols in it. And it's kind of short, but I'm climbing a ladder into the clouds. And my father is at the bottom of it and he's like sobbing. And I'm a child. When I had this dream, I was like 6 and it just never left me. And as I'm climbing up it, I have like a sort of a golden glow to me. And then like, I don't know if it was a separate dream. I don't know if it was the same night or if it was in the future. I kind of used to remember this as happening like, on another night, I had a dream that I climbed back down the ladder, but I was like, I had lost that golden shimmer. And for whatever reason, that dream is just like stuck with me forever. And then, of course, as I get older and you learn concepts of like Jacob's ladder and how this symbolically represents what would you call it? Like, there's these layers that you have to go inward to gain this, like you were saying, this sort of hidden medicine. But it's also kind of steps to enlightenment is how it's also interchangeable with that sort of a concept. So each rung of the ladder signifies another sort of layer of enlightenment that an individual could achieve. And so that always fascinated me, you know, and it's not, I don't think it is one of those things that you just like understand, but what it did do to me was it made me go like, wow, it's really hard to describe that as anything other than Jacob's ladder. And these symbols, like, you know, you're talking about how they're metaphysical in their nature. And it's like, this thing is given to me, this unbelievably dense concept is given to a 6-year-old. And I would and I would spend like many years trying to understand it, and then I would find that like this is actually an important symbol in all the things that I became fascinated with. It's very strange to me because you would have a hard time. You know, some people would go, "Oh, this is your higher self," or you might say these are dreams and visions from God. But it's like they feel divinely inspired, and it's very hard for me to say that I just got some external stimuli as a 6-year-old that then, you know, caused me to dream up Jacob's ladder later on that night. Very, very bizarre.
That's so interesting. I love that. Thank you for sharing. So there's this concept called the Great Triad, and that basically a lot of people have written about this over the years. And a lot of this is like ancient metaphysics, basically, but pretty much that there is a triune relationship between heaven, earth, and man. That symbolically, we are the bridge unto ourselves between heaven and earth, all that is above with all that is below. And so there's so many myths that relate to this. So as an example, you know, you're climbing up the ladder, Jack and the Beanstalk climbing up that stalk, right, to the heavens, climbing up a mountain, right? You're basically getting closer to God, closer to the heavens, right? So symbolically, what I put together, the way I like to frame it is that the journey to the center of self is the journey upward. That is sort of how it works. So know thyself and you'll know the universe. So when you get closer to the still point within, and you do this, by the way, in my opinion, by being present. And so we live in a world where so many people, they're always thinking about the future, especially in the conspiratorial realm. Everyone's always talking about what's happening next week, what's happening next month. What does this mean
Mario,
for the future?
I don't know if you heard, but in November, we're going to get lasered by 3i Atlas. So,
well, Mario, I don't know if you heard, but in September, it's going to be the Rapture. So I don't even know why we're doing this show.
I'm very fixated on the future, Mario.
This show might not even air before we get raptured. So
yeah, exactly. So even just with technology the way it is, the 24-hour news cycle, you know, social media, things like that, people are always thinking ahead. Or there's a lot of people too that are always thinking about the past, and they're longing for something, you know, they're hoping to restore something that, you know, is no longer here. And so I heard this quote and it kind of changed my life. And so I repeat it often, but if you find yourself constantly thinking about the future, you're going to be prone to anxiety. If you find yourself constantly thinking about the past, you're going to be prone to depression. But if you find yourself in the present moment, you're going to be prone to peace. And that's really where you want to be. You want to be in the present moment. And so it's about being, not becoming. And just to bring it back to the wheel metaphor, you know, to talk about the wheel as a metaphor and how it relates to this axis or axle. You know, we're kind of all like our own wheel. I mentioned the wheel of heaven, the pole star being the center of the wheel of heaven. The center of any system is the transcendental point of that system, basically, including self, right? So again, know thyself, you know the universe. There's a golden thread or golden cord that symbolically exists between the center of self and the center of the universe, right? And so when you are operating on the outside of your wheel, you're basically operating outside of self. And so the outside of the wheel symbolically is related to multiplicity. It's related to division. It's related to more of the physical world, I would say. And so it's no different than like a pie chart, right? You have a pie chart, you have all the wedges, right? Each wedge is a separate compartment. That's the outside of the wheel. Now, where do all of the wedges converge? Or where do all of the spokes of the wheel converge? In the middle.
Center.
So the center is principal unity, right? And so this is where the reconciliation of opposites occurs.
Oh, he froze up a little bit. He was cooking too.
Yeah. All right. Let's give him a second. Actually, David, while he's
While he's
up,
frozen.
You want to kick out the pores, or what are we doing?
What time is it?
Mario, you froze up for
Mario, you know what it was? We have to kick out these poor people, and so we have
you got to do
we
it.
have software that actually freezes our guests when it's time to do that. Guys, you've been listening for far too long, and it's very off-putting, and I have to rectify that. If you want to continue listening and prove to us that you have money, patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad is the way to do it.
And yeah, before we kick him out, we had a super chat a while ago, but it didn't pertain. I don't know what this guy's talking about, but Trump being president 45 and 47, 4 + 5 = 9, 4 + 7 = 11. Trump is a president 9/11.
9/11.
Thanks,
There's
man.
a lot of weird 9/11 symbolism with Donald Trump. And there was even like a weird correspondence from him around 9/11 when he was like not really reporting on it, but they were like, Donald Trump, what do you think about this national disaster? And he was like, well, and he gave his whole thing on it. And it was weird. There was a couple of strange moments in there. Thank you. Was that Matthew? Was that his name was Matthew?
Matt. Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
That's short for Matthew. Thank you, Matthew.
Right, we're gonna kick the pores out and let's continue this episode. How dare they?
So where were you, Matt? I mean, Mario, before you got all jammed up with the technologies there?
Yeah. No, I was just talking about the center of the wheel.
Yes.
And so you get to the center of the wheel. You do this by being present. When you get to the center of the wheel, you become what's referred to as the unmoved mover or the prime mover. Basically, he who causes the wheel to turn without actually turning themselves. So you become the axis when you become centered, when you become present. And this was the goal, by the way, of every single king and lord and emperor. They all encode this exact same symbolism. They wanted to rule from their center because they knew by doing so, this is how you connect heaven and earth symbolically, right? And so you're at the most balanced part of the wheel when you get to the center of the wheel. So now chaos can unfurl around you, right? Can be literally swirling around you. And you are sort of the eye of the storm. You're calm, cool, and collected. And this is actually funny enough. This is completely related to the Chariot card, which I know we kind of talked about briefly, on X. Yeah. And so the Chariot card corresponds with Cancer. If I haven't said it in this episode, that keystone in the Royal Arch, in Royal Arch Freemasonry, oftentimes has the Cancer glyph on it. Mm-hmm. The Cancer glyph, it looks like the 6-9 symbol, right? And so it's rotating. And so it's rotating counterclockwise. What do you know? It's rotating the same way the fixed stars revolve around the North Star. The reason why this counterclockwise rotation is important and interesting is because there's a difference between a clockwise rotation and a counterclockwise rotation. The clockwise rotation is actually more expansive. It's kind of like the rays of the sun. The counterclockwise rotation is actually more compressive. It actually brings you closer to what? The center. So the counterclockwise rotation is polar. The counterclockwise polar, clockwise is more solar, essentially, right? And so you'll notice if you're looking at this card here, look at the body of the chariot. It looks like a cubic stone. And that's part of the lore and tradition with this card. It is a cubic stone. And notice that the two sphinxes in front of the chariot, they're not even tied to the chariot itself. And they're seated as well, right? They're just sitting down. So basically what we're looking at is a chariot that's not moving. It's not actually going anywhere. This is one of the esoteric kind of secrets with this card, is that the charioteer is actually this unmoved mover that I'm speaking of. He is in the symbolic center of a wheel, but he himself is not moving. And so the tarot has a way of giving you basically kind of like paradoxical information. You would think that the chariot should be moving, but when you actually look at it, he's not moving. So he's in this body as well, surrounded by these 4 posts. Those 4 posts can be viewed as the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 fixed signs of astrology. There's a few different ways of looking at that. We have this idea of Earth having 4 pillars or having 4 corners or something along those lines. He's in between those 4 pillars or posts. And then you have this canopy of stars just above him, right? And so he is sort of the 5th post, right? And so as an example, when you're dealing with the cross, you have the 4 arms of the cross emanating from the center. You have 4 quadrants, right? The cross has a symbolic relationship with the number 5 because that is the point in the middle, right? This is super, super significant and really, really interesting because every system, like I'm saying, has this hidden relationship with the center. And so a lot of kings wanted to be in the middle of their kingdom, and they believed that they ruled from the center of this great cross, right? And so they represent the fifth element. So when we're dealing with the four, we're dealing with the four basic elements. Sometimes the charioteer, he's actually being pulled by four horses. Those four horses represent the four elements: air, water, fire, and earth. He represents the fifth element. He actually represents spirit, right? And so all of the elements actually came from that fifth element. And so he's sort of at the top of the hierarchy in that little system because he is the center post. He's the fifth post. Notice as well, he has a crown, and on top of that crown, he has a star. That's the North Star. It's the pole star. And so a lot of kings back in the day, they identified more with the pole star than they did with the sun. Nowadays, over time, they identify more with the sun than they do with the pole star. And so
do you think that that's a purposeful obfuscation? It seems like it's not an inversion, but it feels like it's a departure from what people previously understood.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's both. I think that there's intentional obfuscation, but I also think that this is kind of a natural sort of trend, basically. And so the idea basically behind it is that man has fallen from grace. You know, that's my opinion. I look at the modern world and a lot of things, and I see it all over the place. And so people have become less and less spiritual, less and less centered. So we're in a dark age. Personally, that's my opinion. And so in the golden age, people had more of this sort of centeredness to them, and they had more of this reverence for the North Star. So when man fell from their center, symbolically, everything shifted as well. So there is that great shift from the pole star to solar symbolism. So from polar symbolism to solar symbolism. And so then you have heliocentrism, where the sun is the center of the whole entire system, right? And so the center has basically shifted. So when people talk about pole shift, I don't know if you guys have done shows on pole shift or anything like that. I see it as a symbolic shift, actually. A symbolic shift from polar symbolism to solar symbolism. And there's a ton of information about all of this, like more than what you would expect. In fact, if people go to my website, I have a PDF that you can download for free. I have 27 books that get into polar symbolism if people want to learn more about it, because it is such a key to unlocking so many different things. Even as an example, there's Freemasons who basically said that at the higher echelons of Freemasonry, it's about polar symbolism. That's the thing.
Well,
you know,
where on the site can I find that?
The very top.
The very top. Secrets?
Learn more about polar symbolism.
Oh, I'm an idiot right there. Yeah.
I know, you're good.
Words where it says polar symbolism.
Yeah, the ones where it says polar symbol, that's where you'll find it. It's like, geez, dude.
So
I'm sorry.
You mentioned the expression golden age, and that's something that keeps on coming up because I think it was like Blavatsky and Alice Bailey together. You know, they're both hearkening to 2025 as being the start of this golden age, or the age of Aquarius. And then you have Donald Trump using this terminology, interestingly enough, to talk about, you know, what his presidency was supposed to be like, or is going to be like, or something to that effect, that we're going to enter this new golden age, which is, you know, I don't think that that's an accident. I'm not trying to attribute more intelligence to Donald Trump than what is due, but I just can't help, like, when we're dealing with world leaders, especially, you know, those in America, they may have the outward appearance to somebody who maybe doesn't like them, so that they can dismiss them as an idiot. But there's something, a deeper level of knowledge. Do you think that we're moving into some sort of a reemergence of a golden age? You know, they talk about the Kali Yuga coming to an end by fire. Fascinatingly enough, you know, we were talking about the flood and how the rainbow was a promise to not do that again. But fire is still very much on the table, and it seems to be prophesied that that's how, you know, the age will end. Are we, in your opinion, going through that? Is that spiritual? Is any part of that literal? What do you think?
Yeah, a couple of things. So one thing that I've read is that, you know, what I'm putting a lot of stock into is traditional symbolism. And sort of tradition in general, actually. And so I have way more reverence and respect for people's traditions than I used to, you know, years ago. And basically, my school of thought is I've been reading a lot of authors who would call themselves perennialists or traditionalists. in my opinion, these authors are the best symbologists of the modern world. That's how I got into them, is by looking through symbolism and seeing names in certain books, my sort of favorite books. I would look into the authors, and eventually I found, Rene Guénon. He's my favorite symbolic author, basically. And I've learned so much from him and so much from his sort of colleagues and peers, and then also people who sort of followed his work after he had passed. And so what he says is that, people who are interested in traditionalism, they're of course going to refer back to the last golden age. What were people doing during the last golden age? How did people look at spirituality and relationships and just kind of everything? There's actually a lot I think you can learn and take away from that and see how far we've sort of fallen. And what he says is that it's only modern Western people that really always prioritize the next golden age, that they never talk about the last golden age. They talk about the return of a golden age. And essentially, I think he would say that a lot of this is kind of like new age propaganda, or it's like a new age sort of psyop or whatever, because people have been talking about this for a really long time. He also does not give much love or credit to like Theosophy as an example, or Madame Blavatsky. He considers a lot of these people to have distorted a lot of truths from the East, right? And that as it came further west, a lot of things were sort of lost in translation and whatnot. And so, having said that, though, what comes after the darkest age? You're going to start swinging back to something that has more balance, something that is, more harmonious, in many ways. So I do see that it feels as though we are starting to swing back a little bit, and I don't know exactly when this sort of, will happen in totality, or what that's necessarily going to look like. But what he also has said is that the biggest difference between the last golden age and the present dark age that we find ourselves in is literally the return of the center. That the big difference is that the center has been lost. The center of self, the center of the home or family, the center of all things, your spiritual sort of framework and whatnot. And so he's saying that if it's going to return, that's what's going to return with it, is this reverence and respect for this concept that relates to the center. And I just have to say, it's so interesting that a lot of people basically use the age of Aquarius almost like in a synonymous way,
Right.
with this return of the golden age, because Aquarius in the tarot corresponds with the star card. And everything about that card screams North Star. And also Aquarius, the old ruler of the sign, was Saturn. Saturn used to rule Aquarius in most people's minds. Now it's changed. But if we take this old rulership of Saturn, Saturn was the ruler of the last golden age.
Mm-hmm.
And people have said that if there's going to be a new golden age, there's going to be also this return of Saturn. Now, Saturn in today's world, most people view Saturn as this old man, right? Father Time, long beard, scythe. Saturn is known for eating his children, right? That's very interesting. There's a lot to say about that. Saturn, way, way, way back when, was actually viewed as more feminine. And so there was way more of a stronger feminine correspondence. And Daniel and I were talking before the stream, and I brought up briefly the fact that Jake Shields online, he was curious about wanting to know more about the Jewish Saturnian black cube sort of symbolism, which I've done a ton of research.
The death cult?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so one thing that he has to understand, and I sent him a message about this, and he got back to me and everything, but Saturn to the Jews is actually viewed as being feminine. It's not masculine. And so there's a major, major feminine correspondence to Saturn that often kind of gets lost, to most people.
Well, that's really interesting, because this Babylon workings, the whole Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard in the desert doing Aleister Crowley's, I forget, is it Amalantra workings, or no, maybe that's what he did in the Great Pyramid, whatever it was. They're trying to summon into this realm an entity from Thelemic teachings called Babylon. And Babylon is, in their mind, supposed to represent this like divine feminine And then, lots of people are pointing to a bunch of characters that exist today on the playing field that they think could be this entity. Right now, it's like possibly Sabrina Carpenter, but still the idea is
so crazy to say.
It's really wild stuff. But the idea is that they were working hard to summon into this realm an entity that in their mind represented the divine feminine. And so it's fascinating that you should say the return of Saturn is associated with the golden age, and Saturn is this, more divine, more feminine spirit. That's fascinating.
Yeah, no, it really is. It unlocks a whole new level of symbolism. And that's one of the things I like to do that I don't know if a lot of other symbologists do this, but symbolic transfer. You can have a symbol, and if everyone in today's world is saying, no, this symbol is always based around the sun, it's always a man, it's always this, it's always that. That doesn't mean it's always the case, that there have been whole huge stretches of time where people did not see it that way. And so kind of understanding symbolic transfer and that, symbolism in some ways is kind of organic. And so you have to understand that different cultures have their different way of seeing things. So one of the things I just want to mention about this is I think it's really interesting that in the Bible, there are several instances where basically Israel is referred to as the bride of God, who became unfaithful and who became a harlot or a prostitute with many lovers. And literally the Bible says that the whore of Babylon in several cases is literally Israel itself. And so this fits in nicely with some other things that I've learned. But they have this idea of, it's called the Shekinah, and it's kind of like the feminine aspect of the divine, basically. And the Sephiroth on the Kabbalistic tree of life that Saturn corresponds with is Binah. And basically there's a feminine correspondence with that too, this great mother sort of dynamic. So in my opinion, basically, if there's a dark mother archetype in the traditional planetary system, it is Saturn. So this dark mother concept, I think, is very, very strong. So even as an example, are you guys familiar with the Kaaba cube in Mecca?
Yeah.
Yep.
So you have the Kaaba cube in Mecca. If you're a Muslim, you pray towards Mecca 5 times a day, right? You're praying towards the Kaaba cube. I've read that the Kaaba, in some ways, translates to house of the mother, that it's actually a feminine symbol. That cube is a feminine symbol. And they actually put a veil on the cube called a kiswa. And so what do we put veils on? They put veils on women, the burqa and everything else. But if there's a sign that associates with the veil and associates with bridal symbolism, it's actually Virgo. And so veil symbolism is very, very feminine. You could even say symbolically, the hymen is a symbolic veil. There's a lot of things that are symbolic veils, but it matches up with that, with what being a virgin sort of represents. In today's world, virginity mostly means physical sex. In the old world, virginity just used to mean not being wed, not having a partner, something along those lines, right? But even the Kaaba cube, the black cube in Islam, is a symbol of the mother. And so I think when you're looking at the black cube, and of course there's all of these different installations around the world where you see a black cube, you're basically symbolically looking at the abode, or you're looking at the dwelling or the womb of Saturn as a dark mother, basically. And there's a lot of older dark mother cults, right? There's a book called Cults of the Shadow by Kenneth Grant. He gets into a lot of this stuff. And so there's traditions called the Typhonian tradition, basically lines up perfectly with that. The Draconian tradition kind of lines up with this as well. And so to me, that's kind of what I see with that symbolism, right? Is that actually Saturn, for some groups, it's a dark feminine symbol.
I think they kind of did something at this last Super Bowl. So Donald Trump, we were talking about the whole golden age thing. And now that gives me like a little bit more of a puzzle piece. This whole divine feminine aspect being associated with that and being associated with Kronos or Saturn. He ended up being like the first sitting president at a Super Bowl. And that Super Bowl took place in like Caesar's Superdome. And I think it was like the first emperor of Rome ushered in what was called a golden age. So there was like this kind of weird loose connection between like Caesar's Superdome and this golden age. And at the time I was obsessed with the Orphic egg. and how it was going to, because it kept popping up as a symbol in like these really big events. And it was Caesar Superdome from the top down looks like a gigantic egg. And the egg is sort of like, if you were to reduce its symbolism, it would be like one that shows you like order out of chaos, right? So the idea is that there were these chaotic primordial waters, this egg existed, and out of the egg either bursted this entity that created the earth, or the earth was created out of like the eggshell. Just depends on what sort of ancient religion you're looking at. The Vedics have it, everybody has it. And so I'm going, okay, there's like egg symbolism. Donald Trump is ushering in the golden age. He's at Caesar Superdome. He's the first sitting president at a Super Bowl. I'm expecting something to happen. And instead, really all we got was divine feminine symbolism. And by that, I mean, like, they had, I'm going to butcher her name because I always forget her name, but it's like Seasons or Sozens, or she's a rapper. Her name is SZN, I think. And when she appears, she's like dressed in red, and her stage is an inverted triangle, which, like, if you're looking at them rudimentary, it's like the upward triangle is masculine, the downward triangle is feminine. They represent a bunch of different things, but that's kind of one aspect of them. So I'm like, okay, there's this divine feminine aspect. And then they go to a commercial break, and there's a woman who's in flag football, and she's wearing the number 77, which is my understanding 77 is associated with the divine feminine. And she is juking dudes. She's, breaking their ankles, and she's winning. She scores the winning touchdown in this game of flag football. And it's kind of like this big girl boss moment. And I'm going like, all right, they're just giving us like a lot of like, what would you say? Like female empowerment. But now knowing that Kronos or Saturn is associated with the divine feminine, that starts to make a lot more sense. And what do you think about that before I go any further?
Yeah, no, it does make a lot of sense. So what I've learned is that essentially, I would say I think it's fairly universal, but I'll use the word most for now. Most esoteric occult groups have a reverence for the goddess or the divine feminine or their dark mother. That's what it boils down to. That exoterically, it's more okay to sort of have this relationship with God, right? Christianity, there's lots of masculine solar sort of symbolism going on there. That's more of an exoteric thing. And so people who actually have this reverence for the dark mother or the feminine, that's more esoteric. And so they're going to be doing it behind the scenes. And actually, it's interesting as well, because just feminine symbolism in general is more passive. So it's more behind the scenes in general, right? There's even this concept of like the female Illuminati. And it's this idea that actually behind all of these men, the patriarchy, it's actually women running the show. And that's always what they've done.
That's
that they'd rather
mothers of darkness.
Yeah, totally. And so I think that's interesting. And so related to the number 7, though, you're absolutely right. And so I'm not sure if you guys have ever looked into like Thelemic symbolism and their Whore of Babylon concept and everything else. Right. The Whore of Babylon, she's riding a beast with 7 heads. That's the classic sort of thing, right? Their main symbol in that world for the Whore of Babylon is the 7-pointed star. And Babylon has 7 letters. So they will put Babylon within those 7 points of the star. And then even within the star, there's 7s galore. There's 7s all over the place, right? And so I'm going to do a presentation at some point called Babylon, a polar goddess or a northern goddess, because that's what it all represents. That in the northern sky, these 7 stars of Ursa Major and Minor, they were referred to as the 7 stars, the original 7 stars of enlightenment. And some people have put forward that the symbolism associated with those 7 stars got shifted to the 7 planets, basically. Saturn, by the way, being the 7th planet. In fact, I just have to say as well, Ursa Major looks like the number 7. And so I'm inclined to think, I've done a ton of research on this, we literally get the shape of the number 7 from Ursa Major.
Oh,
right?
That's fascinating.
And so Ursa Major has also been referred to as a dark mother. She's referred to as the creatrix. And so there's a lot of correspondences for her, throughout the years, but a lot of different groups have basically said that if there's a dwelling place for the dark mother, for this sort of goddess of heaven, queen of heaven concept, it's in the northern sky. And specifically, it's Ursa Major. So yeah, there's a lot of correspondence and overlap with all these things.
That's fascinating. So that Queen of Heaven concept has been coming up a lot. I'm actually currently listening to an episode, I think, of Tony Merkel's show about this Queen of Heaven concept and certainly the dark aspect associated with it. It's also worth noting that within, I think, the Vedic belief system, their sort of Orphic egg creation mythos, a feminine deity, a mother deity emerges from the egg, gives birth to a set of twins, I believe. One of them, interestingly enough, tries to use the spoken word, to generate the earth realms. Can't do it, lacks the words or something of that nature. And then the other one does it alchemically with the, these foundational elements that are around them. I always find myself asking this question of like, who are these symbols for? I think, let's say, for example, of like the Denver airport, where you're just trying to catch a flight, but you're being inundated with all of these really like deep esoteric symbols.
Right.
And it's like haunting. And then music videos is another one. Like, I know we were saying earlier, Mario, that we've like moved away from our understanding. It's moved into this more like heliocentric worship model, and instead of this polar one. But it doesn't stop, Jay-Z or name your favorite artist from filling their music videos with all of this. I'd love to get your opinion on like, who are these symbols for, in particular when they're in art like that, not a stationary art that's like hung up on your wall or like the cover of Michael Jackson's thing, but like this video that's getting pumped out to the masses. Who is that for? And are they even doing it well? Like actually pulling it off well, or do you watch those and you go like, he's just putting stuff next to stuff and doesn't really know what he's doing?
Right. I've definitely seen instances of that for sure. I have seen other music videos where I'm like, whoa, somebody really, really, really knows what's going on with all of this stuff, and been very impressed actually with sort of the level of depth, in that regard. What I will say is that these symbols, a lot of these, you mentioned the Orphic egg, the symbol of the egg, these basic symbols, like it's imprinted, into us. The symbol of the serpent, people have used that example many times. You've never seen a snake before, but when you see a snake, it kind of does something to you, maybe for the first time, right? And so I think we're kind of hardwired in many ways to kind of filter through these symbols and filter through this artwork and everything else. But I'll say that I think that these music videos, for the most part, they're for us, but not for our benefit, obviously, And so we live in a very, like, in my opinion, a very fallen, degenerate sort of state, and so these symbols and these videos and everything else, they're pumped out to us. But the value, like the sacred sort of spiritual value, is not there. Just imagine people back in the day. I've read about this so much. You might hear a song and it's actually being performed live, like with real people, maybe in a church, maybe it's celebratory, maybe there's some sort of ritualistic aspect to it. Maybe you only heard this song once a year on a holy day, and then that's it. Nowadays, we have recorded music, we have music videos. You can listen to the same song on repeat forever, And so, and the sacred quality, arguably, obviously, there's musicians who still do it, and there's musicians who have that going on, that sort of soul or whatever. But most of it is not that today. Most everything today is basically, it amounts to industry and consumerism and this sort of cookie cutter kind of dynamic where it's all content, basically. So content has basically sort of replaced art in a lot of ways. And so, this really gets into this dynamic that I've been like very, very interested in as well, called The Reign of Quantity. So there's this book by Guénon, who I mentioned earlier. He wrote it. It was called The Reign of Quantity and the Signs of the Times. And the basic premise of his whole entire work of that book is essentially that people in the last golden age, during this last tradition, sometimes you can refer to this age, by the way, as the primordial tradition or the polar tradition as well. But that during this age, everything had meaning, everything was intentional, everything was sacred. There was sort of a value to all aspects of life, basically. So people's qualitative life was very high. And basically, we can use quality as sort of a synonymous word with spiritual. that their spiritual life was very high. Now, as man has fallen from grace, as man has gone through this transition from polar to solar, what has replaced qualitative things is what's quantitative. So basically, now people only concern themselves with quantitative things. Money, right? When we're dealing with things that are quantitative, it's things that you can actually like measure and hold and weigh and all these other things. And so this has completely replaced all things qualitative in our life. And along with that, he says that we've gone through this process of the solidification of the world, where people only see things from a very materialistic sort of perspective. And they actually can't reason or logic or think beyond like anything along those lines. So we're living in a like post-modern world where the reign of quantity has completely taken hold. Everything is all about this sort of this content kind of concept or idea. Everything is basically sort of consumerist and basically fuels industry. And the reign of quantity fits in very nicely with just the monetary system and everything else. So now people put a quantitative value on things. They don't put a qualitative value on things as much anymore. That's how most of the world works, for better or worse.
Right.
He did not denounce the modern world, and he didn't say that you should completely shun it and become a hermit or anything like that. He's just explaining sort of the metaphysics behind it of like what's going on in today's world. And tech is a huge part of this too. One weave that I've gotten into recently is just in terms of the reign of quantity and kind of where we're at. The first transistor was invented in 1947. 1947 was a crazy year, by the way.
Yeah.
We could do a whole entire show on that. So
We have.
Oh, really? Awesome. Good. Yeah, it deserves to be put out there, So there's so many things going on there. The world changed, the US changed. It was a complete sea change. But one of the things that happened was the first transistor was invented in 1947, right? By the 70s, we now had 4 transistors on a chip. The transistor is like the basic thing in a chip that allows it to even work and to compute and all these other things, right? The modern iPhone, a random iPhone that you can go to the mall and get, do you guys want to guess on how many transistors are on the chip in a modern iPhone?
Dude, I mean, it might even be in the millions, but it's like, I know it's hundreds of thousands for sure. Like I've seen the videos where they just zoom in and in and in, and it's freaking incredible.
I know they don't even look real. It looks like an AI video that like never ends. If they just keep zooming in, and there's still like intricacy and detail the further that, how many?
16 billion.
What? Oh my God, there's no way I would have guessed 16 billion.
I was blown away. I could not believe it. So one transistor being invented in 1947, 4 in the 70s. Since then, they've added more and more and more and more. Now the modern iPhone has like 16 billion transistors in it.
That's incredible. All right, look, I got to ask you because, we're talking about metaphysical symbols and these deep esoteric meanings, and a lot of what we're touching on, we on the show, to our best guess, and I don't even know if I want to call it educated guess. We're inundated with information, and then we go, oh, that's overwhelming, and then we regurgitate something horrifying to the people and probably mislead them. But I think that a lot of this has to do with entities that don't exist within our physical realm. Maybe they previously did. They can't exist here in the physical. They do a lot of things like possessing people, but a lot of influential individuals throughout history would attribute their great works of art or their great inspired inventions to literally having been inspired by let's say one of our great examples that we like to give here on the show is what's this guy's name? The Carlos Santana. He is channeling, and there's very many channelers in this conversation. He's channeling Metatron, which depending on who you talk to, it's either an angel or it's a fallen angel. Where do you put the influence of these spiritual beings or otherwise in this? Are they strictly allegory, or are these real in your mind?
I would say both. I think there's instances where people have certainly used them allegorically, and as an example, sort of like ignorance of self can be viewed as being evil, right? So there's a lot to be said about that, metaphorically, about your inner landscape and how, you kind of embody all things angelic and demonic. I can't remember who said it, but it was either Jung or Chris Campbell or something, or Joseph Campbell. But all of the gods and demons are within you, right? And then this idea of kind of like the kingdom within, right? Or like your body being a temple and all these things. Like there's a lot to be said about that. But also, you cannot deny the influence of these things, whatever they might be, however you might want to talk about it, in reality. And I'll say the biggest sort of wake up call for me with all of this is I spent years looking at the night sky with night vision goggles. I don't know if you guys have ever had the privilege of doing that.
No. What did
yeah.
what did you see?
Were you using Dicenian glass? What were you doing, bro?
No. I do want to see those though, for sure. No, years and years ago, I heard a guy on Coast to Coast. I believe his name was Ed Grimsley. And he basically said that he was in the military and he got issued a pair of military grade night vision goggles. He was in the desert. He just happened to look up with the goggles and he saw stuff. And then he kind of made it a routine to look up whenever he had these goggles around. And at the time, that was I wanted to know everything about ETs and UFOs and all that kind of stuff, right? And so I bought a really good pair of military grade night vision goggles. At the time, they were... No, they're not. Exactly. I took out a credit card just to buy them, by the way.
That is awesome. I love that.
Yeah. And I paid even to have a premium chip. So the place I went through, you can have like a specific chip put in that actually like ups the gain a little bit, whatever. And so I bought them. And the first night I got them in the mail, I just looked out my window and I saw what they call it a TR3B, and it's like a triangular craft, right?
Yes.
I saw a TR3B zoom right past my place, and I was like, holy shit. I'm like, I just barely started looking, like 2 minutes ago, and I'm already seeing stuff. And this was in the city. I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time. And Portland is kind of a hotbed, and the Pacific Northwest is actually kind of like a cryptid ufology kind of hotbed sort of thing. And so I just started looking, with these goggles, and I saw the TR3B several more times. I had friends that also saw it as well. Lots of lights, lots of orbs. I had interactions with orbs as well that like literally came towards us and everything else. And then once I started seeing stuff with the night vision, I started having naked eye sightings. That was kind of a trippy thing as well. Not even trying to see stuff, I saw stuff. So I almost feel like I kind of crossed some sort of threshold or membrane or something like that, but it was trippy because I took out a friend and he's a Muslim guy to check out the night sky. That was my thing for a number of years. Hey, you want to see something wild? Let me take you to this park, at 11 p.m. and you'll probably see stuff. And so we saw things, of course. And what I've noticed, at least when I was looking at stuff, is that I saw way more sightings in the city than I ever did anywhere else. I went to the country, I went to the woods, I went to the beach, I went all over the place with these things. I never saw that much stuff, but the city is where I saw the most exotic, weird, bizarre stuff all the time. And basically, he was the first person that told me, he's like, you know what, man? He's like, these might be jinn that you're looking at, that some of these things look like actual, like physical crafts. He goes, but these other things, they look like they're spiritual. And sure enough, like some of the authors that I like to follow with this stuff, they're basically all saying the same thing, is like, yeah, what we're calling UFOs today, people call demons or fairies or whatever else, like way back in the day, So there is something going on out there on that level. Like, absolutely.
I just think they had a better grasp of the spiritual. So we kind of like ridicule them for calling them jinn or demons or something, and then we're like, but they're aliens. And it's like, I think we're the ones that are stunted in our understanding of these things.
Exactly.
Mario, you're saying that you're looking at this stuff through the night vision goggles, and then you're starting to see it with your naked eye. Do you think that would be considering if this stuff is supernatural or spiritual in nature, you think that you kind of had some sort of hitchhiker effect by just doing that?
Possibly. People have said that before. I've heard other people mention things along those lines. I don't know if I felt any different, and nobody wants to think that they are being taken for a ride, but I'm kind of open to it, because the wildest thing I ever saw was with my naked eye. And it, you know, telling UFO stories is kind of almost like telling dreams, you know, in a way. Sometimes people, it just doesn't resonate the way it kind of resonated with you. You know, I think we probably all have had that feeling.
Yeah.
But I was taking a bus from Philadelphia to New York and getting into the city, and my now wife was with me. And above this building, getting into the city, we both saw for like 15 or 20 seconds this. It almost looked like, do you guys know what the bean looks like in Chicago? The silver bean.
no.
Have you ever seen that downtown?
Sculpture?
Nancy, pull that up.
Beam. Just be careful with the Google results.
Oh yeah, there you go. Right.
I think I know what you're talking about. It's like a big we lost Mario for a second there. Kicked him off the screen. Unbelievable.
What happened? Hold on. Okay,
There,
sorry.
It's just this big silver looking bean, and it's kind of like a tourist attraction thing in Chicago.
Yeah.
And it kind of like that, but it was spinning into itself. It was morphing. It was iridescent. It was changing colors, and it was hovering over this building. And like I said, we saw it for like 15, 20 seconds, which for a UFO sighting, that's a long time, actually. Yeah. You know,
that's
and so we could not believe it.
That you're looking at something.
Right. Yeah. And so that was one of the first times where I saw something, and I had this palpable sort of like feeling that it was definitely more intelligent than us, you know, that it was doing things that I basically can't comprehend. It was completely defying physics, you know. And so so that was the weirdest thing I saw, but you know, that was just with my naked eye without night vision and whatever else. So I can't quite explain like what's happening that way. I just know there's a lot of activity up there that if you're really wanting to see it, night vision is a great way to actually see some of that stuff.
See, one of the things that really backs that up is we learned recently that Stephen Greer, he's got the CE5 app, right? And people are using it to sort of summon in UFOs. It seems that your attention on them can sort of cause like an interaction. I think that's kind of what you were describing you experienced. And come to find out, he's using binaural beats, hemi-syncing beats in order to achieve this like meditative state required to call them into our realm or what have you. But those same hemi-syncing binaural beats are associated with causing out-of-body experiences, astral projection, and then it spirals into poltergeist activity, alien abduction phenomenon, demonic activity, all these different things. And the MK Ultra program is using binaural beats to cause a dissociative state that allows for their patients and whatever test subjects to be able to interact on some level with some sort of an entity. I think even, this is kind of hinted at in like Stranger Things, where she's not using like binaural beats necessarily, but she is using like float tanks. So there's this effort to disassociate. So the float tanks is one way because the water temperature allows you to not feel the differentiation between your skin, like where your skin ends and where the water begins, because it's the same temperature, and also you're floating. So you have this feeling of weightlessness that helps you to disassociate from your physical body. These binaural beats are doing the same thing. And what are they putting people in contact with? Well, like entities. Over and over again, that's the theme that you get. So I do think like, there is some physical craft, and whether they are ours, because whenever you have an alien abduction experience, there is often this descriptive of military personnel, scientists, things of that nature associated with it. So there'll be multiple types of beings in the room, one of those being just regular working humans in some sort of military capacity. So I'm comfortable with the idea that like some of these are solid. They may be ours. Maybe there's some conversation to be had about reverse engineering, although I think nowadays I'm getting more comfortable with that being more of an inaccurate trope that isn't as common as you would imagine. But that a lot of these other things are like organics or spiritual entities. They're like light forms that are taking the form of something that looks solid. But that aliens is a really shitty rebranding that is almost exclusively due to like Hollywood and whatever NASA's feeding us. and that the ancients had a much better handle on this. So whether you want to call them jinn or demons or things like that, I mean, I think, you know, here on this show, it's called Nephilim Death Squad. I think that the Book of Enoch really tells you something there, that this idea that there are these offspring of these fallen angels, and that when they died, their spirits didn't ascend, they don't go anywhere, they're kind of stuck here, and that is the thing that torments people when you talk about demonic possession or what have you. So I think that there's nothing new going on, is what I think, and we just have to, in our infinite wisdom in 2025, slap a label on it. That's like when people go like, oh, we're experiencing like simulation theory. And it's like, you're noticing aspects of our reality that the ancients noticed, but those ancients never designed Grand Theft Auto 5. So they didn't in infinite wisdom slap a label on it called simulation theory. You know, it's we are not as intelligent as I mean, not that we on this show think we're very intelligent, but I'm just saying, you know, people in general are not as much as they'd like to believe.
No, I got you, man. I'm right there with you. I agree with a lot of what you just said there, especially the simulation thing. That kind of drives me up the wall, how people sort of present it and think about it and everything else. You know, one of the interesting things that I've come across related to just all of this material is that there's a book actually called Stairway to Heaven. It's by this guy named Peter Levenda. You guys probably maybe know who he is, not sure.
No.
But he's done a lot of ufology stuff and everything else, but he's also like a very serious like occultist, esoteric guy. And he basically compiled this book, and he talks about all of the different traditions around the world where people had this idea that in order to astral travel, you had to cross through these 7 membranes. And so he talks about this in the Jewish tradition with the chariot mysticism. Merkaba mysticism is what it's called. He talks about how the Buddhists essentially had this very similar sort of thing. He talks about all of these different branches of the esoteric world where they had this idea of 7 steps to go to the great beyond. And they had this idea that you were going to the northern sky. And the interesting thing about that is that if you look at the Kabbalistic tree of life, there's a hidden Sephiroth, right? There's 10 main Sephiroth, but there's a hidden 11th Sephiroth called Doth. And that Sephiroth takes you to the dark side of the tree. It's called the tree of death, or the Klipothic tree. And this takes you to the other side, basically. And this Sephiroth corresponds with the north. Esoteric writers and authors like literally will say that this Sephiroth corresponds to the north, basically bringing us back to this bridge at the north kind of symbolic framework. Now, with MK Ultra, my understanding is from a friend and researcher who's done a lot of information sort of digging with all of this and has her own personal experience with this. Her name's Emily Moyer. She basically, one of the things that she talks about all the time is that these MK Ultra programs, they were to disassociate people, as you were saying. A lot of times, I understand that there's a whole branch where they're using the Kabbalistic tree as a programming tool, basically.
That's
you know, and so they would use the tree as a way to sort of, they knew what compartments they were going to program into somebody or whatever, and then how to bring it out with the symbolism associated with that Sephiroth and the path and everything else. But that one of the things behind this is, it seems like people have been doing this for a long time. How do you get people to astral travel and basically be aware enough to remember what they're seeing on the other side and then bring it back for intelligence purposes? Right?
Yeah, they're trying to get them to map it out, which was, I mean, like that's literally what they're doing, is they're sending, you know, remote viewers, astral projectors, however you want to describe it, to this realm and trying to map it out like it's a physical place, which is interesting because that would suggest that it's not just like random ether, but that there's locations that are static in whatever realm this is, and so you could visit them and you could map it out. That is fascinating.
Yeah.
Can I ask you something real quick? When you're doing the tarot readings, what is the idea behind when you're drawing the cards for a specific person? Like what's guiding that the drawing of the cards? Because it's not random, right? You think it's something else?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good question. So, you know, the idea of a synchronicity, right, is that it's a meaningful coincidence.
Right.
And so you're kind of presupposing that the synchronicity is going to do its job, you know, for me, at least in a tarot reading, that if we're going to have a conversation or anything sort of happens, this kind of relates back to what I was saying about the traditional times where, you know, everything had meaning, everything had intention, your dreams had meaning, you know, all these different types of things, whoever you ran into that day, you know, even as an example, when something bad happens in your day. So if I suddenly got a flat tire, you know, instead of just cursing the heavens, symbolically, I'm looking at it now and I'm seeing an opportunity there. And I'm like, okay, well, this happened for a reason. What's the reason behind this? You know? And so it kind of works a similar sort of way when I'm doing tarot readings, is like, hey, you're from halfway around the world. We're meeting together right now to talk about whatever it is you might be going through, whatever you want insights on. I'm presupposing that the cards are going to do their thing in presenting a synchronicity for us. And it's so mind-blowing because once you start using the cards, it's crazy how often they really, really sync up with whatever that person needs to hear or whatever sort of they're going through, how much it aligns like perfectly. And so I chalk it up to that. I know obviously there's people who think you might be working with spirits and things like that. I have more of a detached sort of thing with that personally. And my personal intention is always just for their highest good and for their spiritual development. So I am not somebody that I'm not trying to forecast their future. In fact, I tell people, some people come to me for a reading and they want to know, hey, am I going to get this job? Am I going to get back with this guy? Whatever it might be. And I tell them, I'm like, I'm sorry, but I'm not that kind of reader. You know, if you're interested in spiritual development, that I can talk about all day long. And there's a lot to discuss there. But if you just want to know what's going to happen, I'm not that kind of reader. Same thing with astrology. You know, I think a lot of people use astrology and they just want to know what's going to happen. You know, they want to forecast what's coming ahead. And I don't personally use it for that. I think that there's way better uses for it that are sort of more transcendental in a way and kind of more timeless in a way.
That's
So that's my basic take.
There are a lot of like I don't know what you would call them, like psychics or something like that, but they will start by speaking to entities in the spiritual realm, like asking them to come forward, asking them to do X, Y, and Z, identify themselves, say, wow, you know. And then I've been to a tarot card reader once and there was none of that. You know, and I imagine you kind of, each individual brings their own whatever baggage to the situation. And I'm sure if you were doing tarot card readings, you could be like, you know, any spirits want to do it with us, you know, like that sort of a thing. But that wasn't what I got. And so I don't know, it's a fascinating, and these cards are weird. I mean, they're symbolically metaphysical. They're dealing with archetypes that seem to be true about the nature of reality, and some of them resonate with individuals. It seems like we're all in some ways a little bit less unique than we think. Like I used to look at numerology and I would recognize, I'm like, it does kind of seem to me that dependent upon the day that you were born, you were imbued with certain personality traits and that are defined by these numbers. And so I'm going like, is that the system that we all pass through in order to get, you know, because it goes into that like nature versus nurture concept, why you might have several children raised in the same household, raised by the same parents who all had similar upbringings but are drastically different. And so that really flies in the face of nurture, right? And then I would look at these numbers and somebody would go, oh, I don't know you, but here's your birthday thing. And according to these numbers, there's no spirits involved. It's more like a Google search result. Like, all right, well, this number is associated with this, which might mean that you have this going on. And that number is associated with that, which might mean you have that going on. And in conjunction, these things might play like that. And you go, that's weird because it's accurate.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, I would consider that this is a Christian show, and I would definitely consider myself a Christian. I didn't believe in Jesus Christ for the longest time. Not that I didn't, not that I believed he wasn't real, but that I was like, it just didn't feel, not at least the commercialized, westernized kind of version of Christ that we get, that appears in you know, your sitcoms or whatever, however they do it. There's you know, I think L.A. Marzulli says we have a truncated version of Christianity here in the West. And over time, I realized that there certainly is something to this, and it ended up, you know, showing me enough that it garnered my focus. And the more that I focus on it, the more that it just seems to be this you know, fruit that keeps on giving. but I recognize that within the Christian community, there is like this, really big hesitation to touch any of these things, which in some ways I agree with. I do think that we don't understand the spiritual realm at all. And I think that's been pretty clear by this conversation. Just we're in this materialism paradigm. And if you don't know the territories that you're getting in, it can be very dangerous, right? That's like not knowing how to swim and jumping in the ocean and then finding that it's inhabited by all kinds of horrifying creatures. And also you're going to drown. So I do think that is worth consideration. But I think that there are a lot of things, and I don't know where the line is. It's just something that I'm trying to cautiously navigate because I don't know where the line is.
Right, right. And I've been aware of that too throughout my whole journey with everything, because I felt like for a while I really needed to understand what's happening in the occult world. What are all these groups doing? What are they talking about? What are the symbols that they're putting out there? So I read a ton of that material. And what's happening with black magic, I felt like I really needed to understand what was going on with all of that stuff. And at no point was I ever interested, as an example, of performing somebody's ritual, even though I had read about all that kind of stuff. That's just not my style. I don't really want to do that, because I knew full well, I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. Yeah. I'm curious. And so I feel like I'm going to allow myself to read it. But I'm not going to sort of perform any of these things. I'm not going to engage in it on sort of that next level, because I don't really know what's happening. But I've seen so many people where they jump head in and they're like all about it. And I've seen some horror stories about all of that too. People not knowing what they're doing and finding themselves in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. What does Nancy say here? I can't read it from this far away.
Nancy's asking the type of deck you use.
Oh, yeah. Nancy, there she goes. Nancy's very nosy.
Gotcha. Nosy Nancy. Yeah. So basically, I love the Rider-Waite. And so that's what I have right here. I had it in case there was anything I wanted to show or what have you, right? This is the Chariot card. And it's a classic deck for a reason. And I'll say that when I first started, the deck I gravitated to first was the Crowley deck, the Thoth deck. And there's a lot of really interesting things about that deck. And I actually think that that's the best thing he put out. I don't really care for a ton of the other stuff that he did or works that he did, but his tarot deck.
A big fan of the poem about the hooker's farts. That was my
that's your favorite.
My favorite Crowley work.
Yeah. So I'm not like a huge Crowley guy. I felt like I needed to understand why are people so attracted to him and like what's going on there. And so I read a bunch of stuff about, him being an agent and, all that kind of stuff too. But I like the deck. The deck actually has symbolic value. There's a few things in there that are very, very intriguing. But the older I get and the more I study, the more I favor the Rider-Waite deck, actually. The Rider-Waite deck is like this perfect blend of like updating the symbolism, but the artwork is beautiful. And there's just like a lot going on with some of these cards that you don't see it the first year or two that you're even looking at the cards, but you might see it the third or fourth year or 10 years down the road or whatever. So I feel like it can kind of be, it's a tricky deck in a way, in that the depth is almost deeper than what you think when you first initially see a card. So that is one of my favorite decks for sure. I might even say it's my favorite deck now, actually, over the Thoth deck.
That's interesting. That tarot card reader, he basically just told me that I was in an occupation where I was like speaking a lot, and I was at the time I had started a show and it was like in its infancy, and I go, yeah, and he's like, well, you do like one thing, you've got like your foot in both worlds where you're like, you want to do that thing, but you're doing this other thing, and the other thing's making you money right now. And he's like, I think if you keep doing the thing that you want to do, it's going to work out. And he's like, I think you'll end up being successful, and you're probably going to like end up traveling a lot and all that kind of stuff. And meanwhile, right now I'm traveling for that purpose. I'm 2 hours away by plane at Chops Studios. If you're in Matawan, New Jersey, Chop Studios. But it's interesting because it doesn't, I don't know. Like, I get people's hesitation, and even like, I go back and forth. Like, was that the right thing to do? I was in New Orleans. New Orleans is a very dark place. And even that night, I had something banging on my window. I'm on the third floor of a hotel with no balcony. Something's banging on my window at the stroke of midnight.
Wow.
And then I try to go back to sleep because I think it's in my head. Next thing you know, it's banging on the door, and my wife sits up out of bed, and I go to the door and I look through the peephole. Nobody's there. I go, I'm not going to open the door. So we just sit down and we watch because we're so creeped out. We're just like, I guess I'm just going to watch, some shows now until we can go back to sleep. But, the whole thing was a strange experience. And you know what it is? It's like where Christians, even the more like skeptical Christians about like all these things are correct, is that we don't understand, and this has been pretty evident to me, the many ways in which we will what's the word I'm looking for? Not concede, we will give permission to, we will consent to a thing interacting with us. I think there are in the spiritual realm that are constantly petitioning us to gain some rights to us, to interact with us in some way. And I think we hand over those rights and consents in a million little tiny ways that we don't realize daily. And then before you know it, you're having this, like, I want to ask you, when you were using these night vision goggles and you started to see these things, and there is some viewer, it's almost like Schrodinger's UFO, right? Like the active observation determines whether or not this thing, there's like some quantum thing happening, determines whether or not it interacts with you. Did you start to have, was there anything in your life outside of looking at the sky with night vision that started to get strange? Because oftentimes they'll be associated with this, like, then there was poltergeist activity, then there was weird nightmares and sleep paralysis, then there was just not even, it doesn't have to be negative, but like high strangeness starts happening.
Right. I can't say for myself that there was anything like that necessarily. There were a few things kind of like that with my wife. And so that was interesting. I had never considered that maybe that they are related in some way, shape, or form. And, I'll be completely honest with you guys, too. When it comes to this dynamic, spirits and these types of interactions or whatever, I feel like I'm really dense in a lot of ways. And so I'm like really dense. And so something may happen and someone might be quick to be like, oh, dude, that's because of this or that or whatever. And I try and rationalize it away or something along those lines. Right. And so I can't say I was personally affected with anything like that. But I'll say that what happened while actually viewing these things, that was really potent. That kind of feeling as though something was really happening that was significant or very, very eerie. We kind of got shaken to our core a couple of times, where we see something really significant and then we're like, okay, I think we're good now. Like we got more than what we bargained for. Yeah. It's time to go home now. It's 1 a.m. and we just got tripped out by this thing. One of the things, the story that I always think of is we were just at a school in Portland, Oregon, late at night. Nobody was around. And I used to have a laser as well, like a really powerful green laser. So anytime I saw anything in the sky, I would point my laser at it. Of course, I'm not going to point it at anything I think could be a helicopter or a plane or something like that. Right. But I would point it at things. And I saw up in the sky a ball of light with a smaller ball of light. And these two lights were kind of dancing around each other. It almost seemed like a dogfight or something like that. But they were definitely interacting with each other. And I pointed my laser in their direction. And as soon as I did that, I actually hit one. And so you can see when the laser hits something in the sky, it lights up, it illuminates, right? Yeah. And so it lit up. And as soon as that happened, the dense ball of light completely took off. And then the larger ball of light, which kind of looked a little fuzzy, it came down and it started sweeping the horizon. And there was these trees, and I would estimate that these trees were maybe like 100 yards away or something like that, maybe less. And I thought full well that it was just going to disappear behind these trees. It did not disappear behind those trees. It actually started coming towards us. And I'm following it with my laser the whole entire time. So my wife could see exactly like what it was doing, basically. And it basically went into the schoolyard and started hovering over the ground. It basically came right towards us and then literally went through us, So yeah, so it was really bizarre to see it all the way up in the sky and then actually have this sort of interaction. And I don't know any other way of putting it, but when it went through us, I just got the chills. You know, it gave me the chills. It kind of gave me the goosebumps. I got freaked out. You know, and that's when we kind of like decided to go.
That's
So
interesting. But you got a good look at it. I mean, this was just like a dense ball of light.
it was basically just an orb. Yeah, it was an orb, fuzzy ball of light kind of thing. Yeah.
That's
So there's no, it didn't feel like there was no sense of any like real material construction to it. It was just kind of like illuminated, you know. So
And was there any sense of like a atmospheric disturbance or anything like that, like wind or a whooshing or anything as it passed by you or through you? Or
no, I didn't detect anything like that. Everything I felt was like internal, basically, you know. Yeah.
That's
So,
fascinating.
you know, you got to wonder. It's like, okay, so then, well, yeah, what the hell is that? It literally went through us. So
This phenomenon is like it's crazy because it's like people that are dabbling with UFOs, people that are dabbling with night vision goggles. We had a guy, Colin, I was just speaking with Colin again, dabbling with psychedelics, and eventually ends up contacting entities over and over and over again. And then that sort of shifts away. And now his new thing is these orbs, the same sort of thing, but like in his house going
Oh,
through
wow.
him, his girlfriend as well. So it's like, I don't know where to put this. I don't know where to put that phenomenon because it shows up consistently over at least 3 different types of avenues. Like the night vision goggles are a brand new one to me. So I'm like very happy about
My
hearing that.
My favorite though is when they look at the orbs and like every once in a while you'll get some picture and you're like, there's a face in that orb, dog.
yeah.
Like, and then people are basically saying it's like a reductive version that doesn't require a ton of energy for these things to inhabit and travel around in. You know, you imagine it takes a lot of energy to manifest, and then it doesn't take so much energy to manifest as just an orb.
Nancy's pulling up comments. She's got a question. We have to do to wrap it up though in a minute because I don't want David to have to pay
I'll have to pay another 90. I have to pay another $90.
And maybe if you mention their name again, they'll let you hang out.
Shop Studios in Mattawa, New Jersey. What is she asking over here?
She wants to know if Mario has tried CE5.
I don't know what that is. Is it Close Encounter 5?
I think
Maybe
so.
don't
That's,
tell him. Don't tell
the
him.
Stephen Greer thing. He's basically
He's gonna
using
do it. He's gonna do it. Don't tell him.
It's
You're gonna get him in trouble.
beats that they're using to summon in. So basically, it just expedites the process of almost exactly what you were doing.
I see. Gotcha. Yeah, no, I've never tried to call them in. I've never tried to meditate and sort of create anything. I've always just tried to be an observer with everything.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because if you start to communicate with them, then how do you like close that line of communication? You know what I mean? Like
this is the problem.
You start
That
thinking
Colin,
about, like, hey, come hang out, and they're like, hey, I'm here, and you go.
this is the
"Shit, I haven't
problem
thought that
Colin
didn't
had.
happen."
He's opened up the door for communication, and every time I talk with him, I'm like, hey, were you able to close it? He's like, no.
They're still
Like,
just showing
that's
up.
not cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably should try asking him to leave. Well, we do have to wrap it up because they're going to charge me. And but I want to ask you before we get out of here. Are you having fun, Mario?
Oh yeah, dude. No, this is great. You guys are super
Like,
chill to
look,
talk to, and I'm
well-
enjoying the conversation. Absolutely.
I mean, more so like in your studies and your pursuits.
Oh, did he blank out?
I
They
think
cut
so,
they
yeah.
cut him
Your
off.
basis
Yeah,
and what's that?
no, I said they have you on like a little timer. They're like, he's done. Rob,
Yeah,
go ahead. You blanked out.
But I was saying that you put out a hefty amount of information on a regular basis, and I don't think you do that if like you're not having fun. It's kind of labor intensive. Not only what you're presenting to the public, but also the research that you're doing. I imagine the answer is like, yeah, you got to genuinely love this.
Yep, definitely, man. I mean, to be honest with you, even more than design or art, I feel like I found my true calling. I found my purpose, you know. And so it's the gift that keeps on giving. Once I started putting out symbolic information, my awareness of symbolism continued to grow exponentially because of everything people are, you know, sharing with me, the links people send, the insights and everything else. And so they say that basically, you know, back in the day in this golden age, every sort of occupation was also a priesthood. That there was a sacred aspect to whatever you're doing, whether you were a baker or a farmer or a mason or anything. And so I feel like me finding symbolism is my equivalent with design, is that by pursuing design and art for so long, I've now found sort of the priesthood within that field, which is basically symbolism, metaphysics, all that kind of stuff.
That's very cool. Very cool. Well, I'm glad that we finally got to talk. I've been a fan of your work for a while. I'll continue being a fan. I highly recommend everybody go and check it out, because it's one thing, like I said at the top of the show, to point and just go like, it's the Illuminati. They're doing it again. And it's another thing to understand that symbols are.
We didn't even get into shapes, like basic shapes. That's how dense this topic
there were
is.
things I wanted to ask him if I wasn't going to get charged. Like even just as simple as why are the backs of the tarot cards yellow? Because we talked about, but you can't tell me now. You'll have to come back, Mario. But before we wrap this up, let everybody know where they can find your work.
For sure. So symbolicstudies.com, once again, is the best place to find all of my links, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, all that kind of stuff. And of course, I'd be happy to come back, talk about symbolism. I did a whole presentation called Illuminati Symbolism, by the way.
Nice.
That would be really fun to get into. But yeah, man, thanks again for having me. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for coming.
Absolutely.
This is a pleasure. Genuine pleasure. All right, Top, you got to wrap it up. I know they're going to charge. They're going to do it.
All right, guys. Thank you for hanging out again. Another great episode of NDS. And I think we're done for this week. So we'll see you next time. And until then, don't forget to obey, submit, and comply.
The greatest hypnotist on planet Earth is a oblong box in the corner of the room. It is constantly telling us what to believe is real.
You can persuade them that what they see with their eyes is what there is to see.